I'm going to record. Okay. Thanks. You can start again.
It's okay. So again, 4 speakers will be talking about this. We'll begin with Steve Owens. Yay, Steve. Go, Steve. He'll be focused on transportation and why fair share is needed. Paul McClory is coming from the Mass Teachers Association. He will come and then he'll need to leave precisely at 7:50. So just to give you a heads up about that. And we have Watertown teachers. Janelle is not here yet, I think, but John is. John, how do you pronounce your last name so I do it justice?
It's Remus, John Remus, yeah. Janelle's coming from another meeting. We have another meeting, yes. But she'll be getting on soon.
Okay, terrific. I know this. I'd like to see a graph of how many more meetings people go to now that we have Zoom, but maybe I don't want to see it. But reporting on the local schools, our Watertown schools, and how Fair Share will support their vision and their mission. So I'll say briefly, I think most people know about the Fair Share Amendment, but it is question 1 on the November ballot. If passed, it would create a 4% tax on annual personal income above 1 million. So I want to stress the personal piece of it. It's not a business tax, it's a personal income tax for those people whose annual income is more than $1 million. The money generated by this tax would be constitutionally bound to support transportation and public education. The quote that I got was that it would be for quality public education and affordable public colleges and universities, and for the repair and maintenance of roads, bridges, and public transportation. It is projected that about $2 billion will be generated from this tax, and that this is about our future and people paying their fair share. It's supported locally. In this case with Watertown Faces Climate Change, Watertown Fair Share, all of our city councilors have signed on. Yay, thank you for those of you that are here. It feels like it looks very good, but we need to make sure this happens. So that's why we're focusing. It's also supported statewide by Raise Up, which is a coalition of community organizations, faith-based groups, and labor unions. We want to really encourage people to sign up for the canvas that is coming up on October 1st from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. and clearly also vote this November. I think that Deb will put the information.
Yes, I will.
Yes, in the right. Chat. So without further ado, I want to welcome and say thank you to Steve Owens, who represents many of us as the state rep here.
Great, thank you, Connie. Appreciate that introduction and the description of what will be on the ballot in November. I want to take a step back because a lot of people are a little confused as to why this is on the ballot and then what form it takes. The long answer is that in the Massachusetts Constitution, we are prohibited from having what we have nationally. We cannot have a graduated income tax. The language in the state constitution has been interpreted by the Supreme Judicial Court to preclude a graduated income tax. So no tax brackets, everybody's got the same. Right now it's 5% income tax. It allows for different kinds of income to perhaps be taxed differently. So capital gains versus income versus property taxes, but it does not allow for a graduated income tax. There have been several, I just looked it up today. I found 6, I think, attempts to change the Constitution over the past 100 years or so. Earliest one I could find was in the 60s to change the Constitution to allow it. All of them have failed. So we still have so while Connie does say that the polling looks good for this, the polling looked good in the 90s to start out with. The polling looked good in the 70s. The polling looked good. I found one attempt that failed somewhere around like 80% to 17% or something like that. So we can't take this for granted. We have tried to have a graduated income tax with brackets before, and it has failed. So what the Raise Up Coalition has landed on is a tax with just one, two brackets. One bracket for everybody who earns for your first $1 million. So your first $1 million does not change. So I am not going to make any assumptions, but the vast majority of folks in Watertown, this will not impact in one way. Your first dollar over $1 million will, instead of getting taxed at 5 cents, will get taxed at 9. So we're talking about an extra 4 cents for every dollar over $1 million in personal income. So that's important because, again, if you make $1 million, it's not like you're getting taxed on the entire million. You're getting taxed only on the amount above $1 million. So it needs to be a constitutional amendment, and the process to become a constitutional amendment is we have been working on this, I think, for about a decade now. Originally, the process was initiated by the Raise Up Coalition. They put together a constitutional amendment, a lot of compromises, a lot of work to come up with the language for a tax just on the personal income over $1 million dedicated to transportation and education. They got enough signatures on the ballot, I think back in 2016, to get on the ballot. The SJC ruled, after being sued, that citizens could not put that ballot because it was usurping the legislators' ability to tax and allocate money to particular things. And you couldn't do both of those. You couldn't tax and allocate in the same constitutional amendment as an amendment that was brought forth by citizens. So the legislature put it on the ballot themselves. So in order to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot, the legislature needs to vote in favor of it in 2 successive legislatures. So I voted on it back, I think in last May was the vote. My predecessor, Jonathan Hecht, he voted on it in the session before that. All of the Watertown legislators have already voted in favor of this. So myself, Rep. Lawn, and Senator Brownsberger are already on the record as supporting this. And I want to talk just a little bit about some of the messaging that you might be hearing from the opposition on this. One is that they're saying, gosh, the state is in awash in money. We've got record tax revenues. We don't need to do this. It's unfair to ask people to pay when the state has so much money coming in. And that's true, such it is for this year. But I think we're all important is that this is ongoing revenue, and all the revenue that we have gotten is one-time revenue from the federal government, from the CARES Act, from the American Rescue Plan, from the Inflation Reduction Act. That's all we cannot count on that money. We especially cannot count on that money if we start sliding into a recession, as some people are worried about. If we slide into a recession, the people who make more than $1 million in a single year, seems like recession's not really impacting them too much. So we can ask them to help fill some of the gaps that we have during that time. The other thing that's important is that since this is money that is in the Constitution dedicated to transportation and education, it is very difficult for the legislature. As much as you might trust me as your legislator, you may not trust my colleagues. But since this is in the Constitution, it is very difficult for the legislature to not follow the Constitution. We are subject to lawsuits for violating people's constitutional rights. We're subject to all sorts of and the other thing is, it took us 10 years to get to this point where it's on the ballot. To change that, the funding is constitutionally dedicated. Exactly. We cannot change this without changing the Constitution. We can't play games with it, no matter how you think of the legislature, whether you're fans or not. They cannot play games with this money. It is constitutionally dedicated to transportation and to education. And what we've seen is the need is really there. It's not like, oh, well, we'll put this money towards transportation and education, but that means we'll just put the money that would go there otherwise, we'll just put that somewhere else. As we've seen, we've looked at, we've lived our transportation problems over the past 30 days. We've had the MBTA, we've had fires, we've had deaths, we've had a situation where the MBTA has taken all of its operating revenue, again, the money that it would get every year, so regular revenue, move that to capital projects and underfunded things like salaries, things like project managers, things like dispatchers. Why do we have to wait 20 minutes for the Orange Line, even though they just said they fixed it? So we don't have enough dispatchers, right? It's not necessarily because the tracks aren't, they didn't do the track work while it was closed. It's because we don't have enough people to dispatch these trains. So we need regular revenue for the MBTA. The other thing that I would point out is we need regular revenue for our roads and bridges. As we move forward and we get, this is to Watertown Faces climate change's point, as we move off of fossil fuels for our vehicles, to more electric vehicles, more fuel efficient vehicles, our tax revenue from the fuel tax, from the gas tax, is going to go down, and that money needs to be replaced by something. So there's no question in my mind, and I know the next speakers will speak to the funding gaps in education, though, that the legislature made a promise with the Student Opportunity Act to continually increase the amount of funding that we send to our schools and communities. So there's no doubt in my mind that with extra money coming in, we will use that money for public education, for transportation, and we will use more than what's coming in through that. Just because the need is so great, and we have lived it on the transportation side here, to the point where the federal government had to come in and tell us how deficient our public transportation system is. So I think that's about at my time, maybe over my time, but I'll happily pass it back to Connie for the next speaker.
You're muted, Connie.
Thank you so much, Steve. And I know there may be questions. I was taking my own notes about some things that you brought up. So we'll come back to transportation. I'd like to welcome Paul McClory, who is a representative of YAY, the Mass Teachers Association. And he will be talking about the MTA vision and how Fair Share will support our schools, all of them in Massachusetts. Full disclosure, I worked for Boston Public School as an educator for many years, so I support the MTA. Thank you. Paul, take it away.
and we support the AFT and the Boston, all of the educators in the city of Boston. Our partners, they're one of our many partners on this campaign. So I just wanted to first start out by thanking all of you for having me here to say a little bit about this campaign. Representative Owens and Connie, you did a great job kind of setting the stage. So I don't necessarily need to, explain what the question is. I will talk about our perspective as educators and the public education perspective for a moment, but I do just kind of want to start out and just kind of frame question one a little bit with respect to how we're talking about it as a campaign. Essentially what we are doing, it's a real win-win. We're asking the very, very extremely wealthy among us. And I think that was touched on when you did the math there. We're asking people who make an income of over $20,000 per week, $20,000 per week, to chip in a small amount of their abundant wealth to make generational year-on-year investments in public education and transportation. As we both know and was highlighted before, there are crumbling bridges and that need structural care all across the state. Locally in this area, in the Watertown area, our MBTA is not functioning properly. And then, as Representative Owens mentioned, and I'll touch on a little bit, we just need more funding for education. And I'll explain why. But the point really is that this question, the opponents are going to make it seem like it's going to hurt regular people. It is not. It is not affecting anyone within the possible realm of a normal income. We're going after the extremely, extremely wealthy. And I think the key thing to remember is that the first million in income and first million in personal income is taxed at the flat tax rate of 5%, just like everyone else. So it's not until you exceed 1 million that the 4% surcharge starts to kick in. So anyone, I always joke, anyone who is subject to this when it passes should be jumping for joy and be really excited that they made the cut. And that's how I think about it.
Well, if I could interrupt for a second, could everyone please mute if you're not muted? Because I'm hearing voices in the background.
That's possibly where I am. I did get asked to come into this a little late, and I'm on the road to another meeting. And I'm trying my best here, and I'll try to cover this up. But I'll be brief about it. I just wanted to kind of set the framework. The reason educators support this is there's really 4 big things going on in education right now, with which we need assistance. First of all, there are wage issues. Secondly, there are staffing and resource issues. Thirdly, we need more money for higher education. And fourth, we need, just like the bridges I talked about, our schools are crumbling and falling apart, and we need infrastructural investment. So I'll quickly just go over each one. So as far as wages go, some of our education support professionals, people you call paraprofessionals or teachers assistants across the state, some of them are making like a poverty wage, under $15 an hour. And that is just something that needs to be addressed. In addition to that, we need more staff and more resources in schools. If you haven't heard, there's a teacher shortage, there's an educator shortage. Not enough people are in the classrooms to actually help out with the amount of students that they have. Class size is a huge issue, and this is something that would address. As far as public higher education goes, we have many students who are leaving high school and going into college who then become debt laden. And that is something we need to address. Furthermore, we need safe buildings and we need infrastructural investments made in buildings as well. So that is why we have been behind this question now for 8 years. We've been working on this probably with you out getting signatures, the original go around in 2014, 2015 to get this on the ballot. I don't need to go into that saga, but MTA has been working on this question along with our partners in many other unions, faith-based groups and community groups like yourselves for many, many years. So those are the main reasons that we are supporting the question. And again, it's a massive win-win to both fix our tax system here in Massachusetts, as well as make massive year-on-year in perpetuity generational investments in very important items, that is public education and transportation as well. And I know we have educators here who have been working on this campaign throughout the spring, throughout the summer, and before that, who will add to and touch on what I mentioned. But those are some of the main top line reasons that we're supporting this, and we hope you all join us. And one thing I will put in the chat is volunteer opportunities that will bring you to where you can get involved in the campaign in your area in Watertown.
Thank you so much, Paul. And we look forward to those messages in the chat. Next, we have two Watertown educators. So as I said before, John Remus and Janelle Lacey. John, my understanding is you're a Watertown High School teacher, correct?
That is correct. I teach at the high school, and Janelle's an elementary educator and yes, our current president of the WEA.
Wonderful. So we welcome you. We're really appreciative that you can come and talk about what this means for Watertown and our schools here in our district. Do you have one person that would like to begin the conversation?
I can go first, John, if you want.
Okay, that works. Yep.
All right.
We'll go elementary up to high school.
All that works. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here tonight to share my thoughts about the impact that passing the Fair Share Amendment could have for our Watertown Public Schools. As Connie said, my name is Janelle Lacey, and I've been teaching at Cunniff Elementary School for the past 19 years. I believe, Miss Henry, I even taught your granddaughter Maya when she was in my second grade class a few years ago.
Yes,
a wonderful student. Last May, I was elected president of the Watertown Educators Association. So this is a new role for me and one that I'm very excited to take on in support of our students and educators. And in the past 19 years, I've seen a tremendous change in Watertown. The now city of Watertown is more diverse and seemingly growing more and more each day. A little over 39% of our students in our public schools in Watertown come from homes where English is not their first language. And approximately 33% of our students in our district have been identified as economically disadvantaged. So the core values of our district, excellence, equity, and community, really provide the foundation for our success in Watertown. With excellence, we hold high expectations for all of our students, and maintaining equity means providing the resources for academic and social emotional success for all of our students. And lastly, partnerships with families in the community we believe are foundational for student success. Watertown, as you know, has been transforming our schools for the past few years. The brand new Net Zero Cunniff Elementary School and Hosmer Elementary School opened up in the fall of 2021 and winter 2022 respectively. And the renovated Lowell Elementary School is scheduled to open its doors in the fall of 2023. Plans for our newly built high school are moving forward, and from what I've seen in pictures, it will be a state-of-the-art learning environment for our students. But it isn't just what the buildings look like on the outside that makes our schools welcoming places to be. And don't get me wrong, I love our new space and having air conditioning. It's what happens inside of the buildings that make the students love coming to school. I'm sure it will be no surprise to all of you when I say that students thrive when their learning environments make them feel safe and provide them with a sense of belonging. We're still in the process of recovering from educating students during the COVID pandemic, and the social emotional supports that are needed now are far greater than they were pre-COVID. During my time teaching over Zoom, I saw firsthand how challenging it was for many of our students to participate in their learning. One student told me that it was hard to do the work because they had to help their mom take care of the babies at home. Despite how hard our teachers were working during this time to reach everyone, some things were just out of our control. And now that we're bouncing back, we see a need to close those learning gaps that may have resulted due to the pandemic. Passing the Fair Share Amendment, as you know, would give $2 billion a year constitutionally dedicated to public schools, higher ed, and transportation. In Watertown, this could mean hiring more educators to give students with social emotional needs the supports that they need to achieve high expectations. Watertown's growing English learners population demands a need for more educators to provide these students with the sheltered instruction that they need to develop their academic language skills. And when a newcomer arrives in our school, all of our resources for supporting our English learners have to adjust. This happened more than once last year at many of our schools, and we just need more educators to continue to provide these students with what they need. Passing the Fair Share Amendment could also mean providing more resources for our economically disadvantaged students. Currently, all students are able to get a free meal for breakfast and lunch, which I think is wonderful. I believe that this is something that all schools should be able to offer students every year. I've seen students come to school in the middle of winter without coats and gloves and boots, and I think we can do better for these students and their families. Having a coat closet at each school for students would be able to take the things that they need to stay warm would be life-changing for many of our students. And one of our core values, as I've stated, is equity. We now have a director of inclusion, equity, and belonging in our schools, and the district is committed to developing an equity plan to address the equity report that was completed last year. Fair share funds could be spent on addressing the goals that will come as a result of this plan being put into place. Professional learning opportunities for educators around equity and programs like our Kenyon Nonviolence Training Program are just a few of the items I believe fair share funds would contribute to helping our schools become a place where everyone feels they belong. And the last point I will make briefly is about our educators. Watertown's filled with amazingly dedicated educators who deserve a fair contract. Our first year instructional assistants make a little more than $25,000 a year. This is not a living wage in Massachusetts, and many of our dedicated instructional assistants work 2 or 3 jobs to be able to pay their bills. Our educators in Watertown are in negotiations right now with our administration and school committee, and passing fair share would give our district the funds it needs to provide our dedicated educators with comparable wages that would keep up with the rising inflation projections. I thank you for your time and look forward to coming to another meeting one day and sharing out how the fair share funds are being spent to support our Watertown students. Thank you.
John, go ahead.
Yeah, that's tough. That's a tough act to follow in many ways.
I'm sorry. That's why
I will say a couple things. So I'm just more here as a as an educator. I also I'm the Senate District Coordinator for the MTA. So I'm and the building rep at the high school. So I work in different avenues with all these people. I will say one thing, if I could do a little commercial quickly. I'm also a civics teacher at the high school, and I'm always and continuously looking, because people especially my students get sick of hearing me. So as we move forward, I mean, just in those opening reports from the committees and subcommittees, I would love to be in contact with many people as far as what's going on in Watertown. I mean, because that's the whole goal of civics program at the high school, as far as getting and preparing our high school students for preparation when they leave high school and while they're here now as seniors, as far as being good citizens. And sounds like there's some great things going on right now in the town, which I would love to make the students aware of. We did have Representative Heck come in one time, and I had his own sons in the class, and they were horrified, but it was a great opportunity for the kids to see firsthand. I will say also, so I spent a lot of my summer as a summer member organizer with the MTA, and I actually worked with and a lot closer with Paul, who is like doing what we're doing right now. He's doing it in every town and city in Massachusetts, and I don't know how he keeps up his schedule. But I would say I did a lot of canvassing all summer, and the response has been great for those people that have been home. Obviously the obvious thing is, do you make $1 million? And for the majority of people, it's no. But I will also advertise the October 1st canvas. We had one a couple weeks last Thursday, actually, with Belmont educators and ourselves, Watertown educators, and a lot of some people on this call also joined in. It's and I say it's fairly painful. It's a great experience for people to be aware of, and I think somebody put in a chat at the very, very beginning. It's question 1 now, so it's a great, and I'm not a person who is very big on like big discussions and stuff like that. And it's easy to say I'm a teacher and question 1 is really going to help our schools. And I really believe that it is. We're in a great, I've been close, it's about the same amount of time that Janelle's been in Watertown. I've been here 21 years. As far as structure, I've just had the opportunity to tour, or not tour, but visit some of the elementary schools, and it's amazing what has been done in Watertown. And hopefully the high school is down the road and going to look like that as well. So, I mean, as far as safe buildings and structure, as far as structurally, I mean, we're in an awesome place compared to a lot of other districts. But there are a lot of districts and a lot of students and kids in throughout the Commonwealth who are not in that same position, who certainly the districts and towns could certainly benefit from that stuff. I think Paul mentioned, and Janelle also mentioned, you know, I'm very well, I'm compensated well as an educator in Watertown, but obviously times are changing and we're going through contract negotiations, and obviously the inflation rate and everything else and cost of living is changing. So it obviously could be greatly improved. But the IAs, or the support people in our schools, the paraprofessionals, and they call them different titles in different districts, they're the ones who do tons of work, who are really justly not compensated. I mean, unjustly not compensated. They're the ones who are right there in the trenches with our students and do some amazing stuff every single day, who certainly could benefit from pay raises and certainly more compensation. And then staff and resources. You know, at Watertown High School, as small a school as it is, we're certainly understaffed. I walked into a math class the other day to visit a friend who's a math teacher, and he had 31 kids in his math class. And I was like, wow, you know, luckily for him, he said it's an honors class where the kids are kind of well driven, but there are a lot of classes that are right up there in the high 20s and the 30s, which, you know, whether it be more staff or more resources, certainly we could benefit from in Watertown. You know, and the last thing I'll say is, as I mentioned earlier, I teach civics and U.S. history, and currently just the point we're at in the textbook, if you will, is unions and industrialization and stuff like that. So we're talking about unions and just different things as far as work relationships. And, you know, I always start with, you know, what does the high school need? I kind of tell the students that, you know, their main job right now is being a student. So if you were to form a union of students, or you were to try to raise your voice about what you really need as students in this school, what do you need? And a lot of things they bring up, and they say, yeah, but that's going to take a lot of money. We don't have the money, and this money's not there. And, you know, as a little commercial, I always say, well, there is a ballot question that could possibly change some of that, you know. And I play the middle of the road, despite my own personal feelings. I don't like to sway kids either way, but you know, they do mention a lot of items and a lot of issues in our own school, as great as it is. And I think we're very fortunate to be in a great district in Watertown. But obviously there are things that could certainly be improved, and we're in a good spot. And there are plenty of districts across the state who could really benefit from more money, more staff, more resources. And all of the things that Janelle said a lot better than I am right now. So, but like I said, I would highly encourage anybody who has even 20 minutes, a half hour, to come out on October 1st and help with the canvas, and anything else that. And as I said, as a civics teacher, being in the high school, I would love to be in contact with as many of you to kind of give opportunities to students as well. So that's my spiel.
Yay, thank you so much. This is so inspiring. John, I want you to make sure you notice in the chat that Steve has signed up to speak to your students and to horrify his 10th grade.
Okay, that's perfect. That's perfect.
So
I would love it. Like I said, anything is it would be great. So we've had Steve Tolman spoken in the past, and like I said, Jonathan Heck's come in. So Steve, I may very well take you up on it. So thank you.
Sounds great.
All right, thank you.
Happy to.
And I think in terms of community residents, there is a lot connected to civics and being civic minded. So hopefully you we can figure out ways to reach out about the climate action plan and other things that might interest your students. I do have to just say on a personal note, I'm retired, but I'm working with Boston Public Schools paraeducators in a project for 2 years, giving them math professional development. And so there are many ways that when you do well by IAs and paraeducators, it really impacts the schools. They don't have, they work directly with students every single day. So I really am glad both of you have spoken, many people have spoken about this. So now it's our turn. If you have questions or comments, I also want to remind people of Steve's cautionary tale that this is looking good, but it's not a guarantee. And how do we make this happen so that it passes this time? If you have questions or comments, just raise your hand. I see Tony right away. Tony, take it away.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your presentations. I wanted to ask a few questions about how the money will be distributed and what's the process of how much goes to transportation, how much would go to education, and then who would be responsible for the distribution of it to, let's say, the districts. So someone would say there was, I forget, it was one of the speakers said we're looking at $2 billion a year. I mean, that obviously would fluctuate depending on how many millionaires we have in town, I mean, in the state. But I'm interested in going just a little, and I apologize if I'm supposed to know this, but I would like to know how the money gets allocated to education, and then how much to transportation. And then once that allocation is made, who actually ends up distributing it? Is it in the state legislature's hands? Is it in the Department of Education's hands? So that's the question.
Yeah, so happy to happy to answer that. The short answer is that it'll be in the hands of the legislature. It will be a dedicated pot of money that will get allocated to these two groups of funding targets. So either transportation or education, based on the legislature on the same way that we allocate the Chapter 70 funds for schools now, the Chapter 90 funds for roads. My assumption is that it will get allocated based on whatever the need is. We've got 20 or so structurally deficient bridges. Once we go through that, there'll be maybe less money needed for transportation, but there's certainly no shortage of things in those two buckets that we have. And in fact, when you start talking about the work that we've done to try to fully fund the Student Opportunity Act, that's money that we've already dedicated money to that, and there's not really a funding source unless this passes to fully fund the Student Opportunity Act. So the money is going to be allocated, and it will be allocated to these two buckets, above and beyond what we're already spending. It does, it is in the legislature's hands of what the ratios are going to be. So when you advocate, you all have my email and phone number. So, as well as Senator Brownsberger and Representative Lawn, it's going to be up to everybody to advocate for the kinds of projects that we want to see this money go to, whether it's just fully funding upping the formula funding, whether it's early education, whether it's reducing the community college costs. These are all things that we're ready to do in the legislature, but we can't unless we have a dedicated funding source.
Thank you.
Thank you. And there's a related question in the chat from Tiffany that says, given Watertown's good spot, is there a risk that the monies from this wouldn't get to Watertown at all? Is it based on school district most? What's
I mean, I suppose there would be a risk. I mean, then, you know, your reps and senators would not be doing a very good job of advocating for you if that were the case. My assumption is that this money will go out in the formula put together in Chapter 70 that was just tweaked under the Student Opportunity Act. So everybody will get a proportionally larger amount with that formula. That's my assumption.
Thank you. So we have two, I'm going to call on John and then on Pam. Go ahead,
yes,
John.
Yes, thank you for the great sharing and imparting knowledge of question one. So for those of us who are going out on Canvas and convincing folks on the fence or who don't know about it, I want to start thinking about combating the disinformation that's been out there in Watertown. I remember seeing not too long ago a couple of conservative Watertown websites of spreading information like wildfire. And one of them was, well, you're now going to be taxed on an extra penalty if you sell your house, because a lot of houses are selling for $1 million. And I know that's not true because question one is based on income, and property sales would be a capital tax gain and not be impacted by question one. And also I heard about selling businesses, mom and pop, you know, the fictional mom and pop that these multi-billionaires would like to have us think about. If they're selling their only business at the end of their retirement, then they too would get hit on the extra revenue on the additional 1 million. So maybe somebody could help us with talking points about how to deal with some of the disinformation messages that are getting out there, because a lot of them are just simply bull. And I want to be able to speak with whomever about any kind of question. So is there a talking point memo?
If I could just jump in. So like even one of my best friends is like, he's already peppered me with questions like, so if this passes, every major league player and NBA player is going to leave Boston and never sign with Boston because it's going to be more than $1 million. And then the house sale thing has come up too. I will say, and I'm by no means an expert, and that's part of like I kind of when I did it this summer, even when I do it, I just kind of talk about it. This is something really important that would really help the kids and the students and the education system. But I will say, at least for the many canvases that I've been on, there are people from Fair Share, there are people from the Mass Progressive and stuff who provide great talking points. And they kind of go over that, and there is a training. So if you haven't canvassed for this ballot question in the past, they certainly will prep you before that in terms of some of your things that you're expected to hear. And I'd be lying if I was to say I was an expert on saying that, but I think, as you just said, a lot of that stuff. I think when people hear it from the heart that this is something that's important, I think a lot of people are persuaded. But they do, and I October 1st will be the same. But anytime I went out this summer or the fall, there were people there with, this is what you might need to be prepared for and stuff like that. And if you don't canvass, and just in general conversations, then unfortunately that's not something that. But what you just said pretty much summarized great responses too. So
yeah, and I would just on the business, the sales of businesses. There's, I'm not a tax accountant. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a tax attorney. But in order to make over $1 million when you sell your business, with all the deductions, with all the capital that you've put into the business, with all of the you know, the deductions that you can take from running a business for I don't know how many years, if it's a real mom and pop business, and you sell it for over $1 million with all that taken into account, you can spare the extra 4 cents on the dollar. You're already you're doing okay by that measure. You know, with house sales, again, you know, you're taking not just the if you sell, I mean, there are some houses that are worth more than $1 million in Watertown, you know, but when you sell them, it's against the capital gains, right? So your income
at all. Yeah.
So to the extent that it would be taxed, it would be taxed by that. So again, I'm not a tax attorney. If you sell your house for over $1 million, just that part of over $1 million, even if it were to be taxed, the extra 4 cents is not gonna be that big of a deal.
And I want to make clear that house sales do not invoke income tax. So it is solely capital gains tax. So it would be exempt from the fair share amendment. So want to spread that out there. So
okay.
Nobody comes up with house sales as an excuse.
Yeah. And we had some teachers that even tried to were saying that, like, I'm nervous, I'm going to be selling my house, is it going to impact me and stuff like. And I can kind of get it in that sense from
capital gains only, yeah.
But right. And then just as Representative Owen said, that came up as far as businesses and stuff. And I think there are so many businesses that are always trying to make themselves, quote unquote, look good by donating to this and donating to that. I mean, what better way to, you know, have it directly, you know, benefit somebody in the students. And Janelle made a great point this year, which I really see at Watertown High School, about like the free lunches, which I unfortunately have bathroom duty during lunch period right near the boys' bathroom in the cafeteria, and the lines are ridiculous, like the longest I've ever seen. And kids are really benefiting and taking advantage of that, where in the past, you know, I don't know, I just really didn't see that. And not, you know, not that it's free lunches but it's a small part that really is a big part for student success. So, and breakfast. So,
well, thanks for your interest.
So this is really good. And I also want to say, so I don't forget, there is a link to the Canvas event. And if you can't do it on October 1st, there's other dates in there for you to sign up for. I hope people are very inspired. As John said, you know, however much you can do some of it, canvas some, and spread the word, and also help spread the misinformation. Pam, you're next.
Okay, I just want to clarify, because I just did a quick reread of the question and I didn't see earned income in the text. So we're saying that the $1 million only applies to earned income and not to capital gains at all?
Yeah, I think that it may apply to capital gains, but I'll have to look into that a little bit more. So I think it does actually. I think it may apply to.
Because I'm familiar with the 5% applying to earned income and long-term capital gains, and the 12% is for short-term capital gains, which I avoid like the plague. My real question though is, we've recently been hearing about how they found this old law that's supposed to give people a rebate if they're quote unquote taxed too much. And I'm just wondering, how would that interact with this new law? Should the amendment be?
I can speak to that if you guys want me to, about the was it 62F or 8F? So there's a law that was passed by referendum in 1986, and basically what it says is it puts a cap on state revenues based on the amount of income, based on the 3 years of income growth, the past 3 years of income growth. And right now, for a number of reasons, we are obligated to return about $3 billion to the taxpayers because we have exceeded that threshold. There's a couple unique reasons to the pandemic where that caused that. One is there were a lot of people who had to pay taxes on their unemployment. So tax revenues were up, but incomes were down. Incomes during that 2020 pandemic year, there was a contraction of income. So the amount that we were allowed to grow was artificially lowered because of that. At the same time, we got more tax revenue from the expanded unemployment benefits and other things. You know, there were a lot of people who were, instead of spending money on a vacation, they were spending money on fixing up their home office, for example. So sales tax were up, income taxes were up as well. But the threshold came down. So that is not in the Constitution. That is a law. If we need to tinker with those numbers so that we can make sure that we can, you know, spend this money for so that we can, you know, have enough money to spend for the transportation and education that we're obligated to, as well as all the other things, mass health, etc. You know, we can make that change, but for this year, that is going to be in play. And again, this is the first time that it has happened since 1987. So it's just a combination of circumstances that caused it to trigger that. You know, hopefully we don't have another worldwide pandemic. Hopefully we are going to be, you know, a little bit more savvy about how these things go. There was also some revenue that we got in advance of some tax cut that during the Trump administration that I don't quite understand, but that money came into the state and is supposed to go back out again to the tune of well, I don't want to say because I don't know off the top of my head, and I haven't quite gotten my mind around, you know, why the revenues are so high. It's been one of those things that I've looked into the report that the auditor put out. But so that's my answer to that. The 1986 law was triggered through a unique set of circumstances. If this law does pass, we can start looking at, all right, well, does it make sense to exempt this part of the incoming revenue from that law? Does it make sense to, you know, change the allocation? Right now, you know, the allocation goes back in the proportion that it was paid in. So if you have a high income and therefore have a high, you know, level of taxes you're paying, you are going to get more money back. But if you have a low income and therefore low taxes, you may not get very much at all, which, you know, in an inflation, when we're all dealing with inflation and high cost of living, you know, maybe isn't what we would have, you know, put together if we were working from scratch. So that's a long answer, and I hope it touched on what you were hoping for.
Mm. Yeah, I just wondered.
So if you find out more, Steve, will you let us know? That would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think the real thing for that is, you know, one foot in front of the other. We don't have to worry about that 1986 referendum law if this doesn't pass. So let's make sure that we get this passed, and then we can deal with, you know, the implications, you know, once we know what we're dealing with.
Yeah. That's wonderful. And I think you also point out how complex things are, but I keep returning to the fact that this was a really well-designed amendment, and it has very targeted and very needed. I'm wondering whether, oh, there's Sue. Sue, go for it.
Thanks. So I guess the point that Pam raised to me is of great concern in how I talk about this with people, whether or not the capital gains is in fact part of this, because it just says income and not earned income. So to me, it feels like that's pretty urgent. And I'm not sure, who would be the right person or place to ask that question.
Mm.
Yeah. So my understanding, and before John was talking about it, my understanding was it did apply to capital gains, but I can double check that.
Okay. I mean, people selling homes and businesses, it does seem like that could change the way people think about this amendment.
From what I've seen of the material that's been put out from Raise Up, it does sound like it is covered. It is not exempt because they have specific responses about how to answer the question about house sales. And it's basically, most people, even if you sell your house for $1 million, it's not net because of what you already paid for it and whatever other funds that you put into it. Plus, there's a up to $500,000 deduction that gets applied to any house sale. If it's at $500,000 if it's a married couple. So even houses that sell for $1 million are probably not going to reach that threshold. But if they do, again, I think the argument is, should you be that lucky? It's a one-time contribution.
If I could interject, I did find a policy guidance on the Mass Budget and Policy Center, and it does address the issue that I raised. It talks about housing sales and capital gains. And a question says, when a seller sells a home for more than the purchase price, this difference is known as a capital gain, the difference between the sale price and the previous purchase price. For example, if a home were initially purchased at $450,000 and eventually sold at $1 million, the capital gain would be $550,000. If the same home sold for $1,450,000.01, the capital gain would be $1 million, but the taxable amount of a capital gain from a home sale is almost always reduced by significant deductions. And it states that only a very small portion of households in Massachusetts actually sell a home, and most of those sales produce a capital gain of less than $1 million. And then they mentioned the deductions that homeowners can take advantage of in selling. And it basically states that there would be very few house sales over $1 million that would invoke the millionaire's tax here. So I guess there's enough to convince me that it's not going to apply to all house sales over $1 million. And taxation is based on the capital gain, the difference between what a seller paid for it when he or she bought the house and what that amount is, coupled with all the multiple deductions that are available for home sales. So yeah, so my second read after reading that primer is that it's going to be rare that a house sale will be invoked.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. Like I said, I'm certainly not selling anything for over $1 million. That's my own, I'm just speaking as a teacher and as somebody, I'm not selling anything over $1 million. So I'm all in, but I understand the concern of people who may or may not in the next few years sell something over $1 million.
Yeah, and look, there are people who have, there are many $1 million plus homes in Watertown, but most of them were not bought for $1 million, you know, the amount that they might sell for minus $1 million.
Yeah.
Correct.
You know, most of them were not. And then with the deductions that you get that reduce your capital gains, you know, there are very few houses that are going to have a $1 million capital gain with the deduction included in Watertown.
Right.
That would trigger this. You know, I can think of maybe one or two off the top of my head, but I don't know what they were bought for. And my guess is that they weren't bought for $1 million less than what they would go for. Mm-hmm. So, and Jennifer had her hand up, and I think, yes. I don't know if Connie saw, okay, because you called, okay, good.
Yes, I thank you, Steve. I want to call on Jennifer next, and I appreciate how we are delving into this, so we're prepared to canvass. Jennifer, thank you for being patient. I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand right away.
No problem, thank you. Thank you, and thank you for recognizing I had my hand up. So I just want to thank all of you for being here. I totally support the Fair Amendment, the Fair Share Amendment. I think it's great. It's overdue, in my opinion. As a retired teacher, I think the money going to the schools is very crucial. And also to repair our roads, which are a mess, is a good thing, and the bridges, etc. So I'm all in favor of it. My question regards, I've been seeing advertisements on TV against the Fair Share Amendment. And they're talking about, you know, how businesses are going to be taxed and impacted. And I just am wondering if any of you know how, if there's some sort of a counter campaign going on to sort of correct that misinformation or disinformation. It sort of goes along with what John Gannon was bringing up earlier, that this misinformation or disinformation is being put out there, and is there some sort of a counter campaign, I guess, is my main question. So thank you.
Yeah, the Raise Up Coalition has got ads on the air as well. I mean, obviously, I think there's going to be a, you know, the folks who make multi-millions of dollars every year are the ones that have money to throw at this. So, you know, my guess is that we will be outspent on the airwaves. But that's why we all need to get out there and knock on doors. And I will say, in my canvassing that I've been doing mostly in Cambridge, it's been very, very well received. Folks really want to know what is going on and are very receptive to it. I will say, just to the point on the businesses, the only businesses that get taxed on this are pass-throughs, S corporations. If your business is getting taxed on this more than it would be if it were a C Corp, then get a new accountant, get a new CPA, and switch to a C Corp, is my advice to you as a non-professional. You know, they do this tricky thing where they conflate pass-through you know, S corporations with small businesses, because these are businesses where, you know, the money gets passed through from the entity to you as to simplify things. But Fidelity, I believe, is a S corp, and no one would think that they were a small business, right? So, you know, folks like them are pushing this narrative that, because if I have a pass-through corporation or a pass-through entity, I'm a small business, but that's not true. So again, if your business is getting taxed to death by this, then you need a better accountant, because you should be able, as a corporation, to avoid this if you are being, you know, hit so hard that you need to close your business.
Well, it's interesting. I'm glad we're doing this in October, and October 1st, and I think I imagine that they're waiting to do the bulk of their ads closer to the election. And so I think this is an ongoing conversation for us. Are there any other questions, or as I used to say, comments? It's going to be very, very exciting going forward. I think, Pam, you might get one of the last words.
I was just thinking that the whole problem with the house sales and business sales is that it might be extra fraught for people because these are things that happen very rarely. So it's easy to scare people about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens in the advertising. People pick up sound bites and stuff like that and get scared on certain times. I mean, even teachers that have approached me about certain, like some of those sound bites and stuff like that. It's just a matter of, although they're still for it, but then it puts a shadow of doubt in their mind. And I think somebody said yes on one is going to make a big push. I mean, I know there are ads out there, but you know, I think the grassroots power of everybody here is going to make the difference. So, and across the state. So that's why October 1st canvas for Watertown is important.
So this was so informative. I thought I knew things about Fair Share, but I didn't know all the complexities, and I feel more prepared